since we forgot to start. So here we are for the recording. We're just getting started. Everyone's already introduced themselves. And we're just getting started with our agenda. So Paul is going to say a little bit for those of you who weren't in our last meeting. Oh, Greg, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just real quick about raising your hand. If you click, you got to close the chat and click down at the bottom where it says participants, and the window shows up with all the participants, and on the bottom of that window it has raise hand. So,
okay.
And I just wanted to mention that the things about view work differently if you're on a phone. I don't do this on a phone, but I've heard that it has to do with swiping. So if you want the gallery view, I think you have to swipe one direction or the other.
Okay, all right. Well, since the hand raising requires sort of getting rid of the chat, maybe we'll just stick with the visual hand raising. And then Michael, if you're still there on the phone, and you know, obviously we can't call on you, just go ahead and interrupt.
Yeah, well, although he didn't have sound.
Oh.
All right, so the reason we're doing this, and I'm going to try and be really brief because you've read sort of why, and we're already falling a little bit behind on the agenda, is basically what I said in my introduction, that we spend an awful lot of time lobbying for bills, and those things have been defined as what's possible legislatively, what's feasible. And there are a lot of people out there who have been doing research on some really bold ideas, and they don't wind up in the public discourse very easily. And so I think what our goal is in as many areas as we can to develop a better understanding of what is possible, and then putting it in a really palatable format, not a 30-page research brief, unbrief, but a real like 2, 3, 4-page with a graphic, you know, something very easily digestible that can take people who don't have the time to do the deep dives to kind of open their minds to what's possible. And so it's interesting that one of the things that occurred to us initially was that it should have some kind of credible connection to the legislature where we could get a bill or something like that. And I'm not so sure that's really the case. This might be pre-legislation. It's really opening up the doors. And so things like the Public Bank and the Health Security Act, which obviously Retake cares a good deal about, has local researchers doing a good deal of research, and they pretty much have it laid out, what they want to do, why, and everything. Where we want to look at it is where it's not as broadly known. And so it's not to dismiss those things that are really important, but that's the overarching purpose of what we want to try and do. So no, I don't see any hands. All right.
So let's talk about protocol for research information gathering. On the document that we sent you today, which is a revised version of something that we sent out previously, we combined the two things. One, we had originally sent out research protocol, then we sent out the study group framework, and then we realized that there was crossover and we should put them all into one document. Protocol for research. Well, protocol for the gathering of the research is what we're talking about, right? Yeah. So are we talking, but this is criteria.
Right, it's further down.
Okay.
It's really just in step one, what we want to do next.
Wait, can I just finish?
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So last time, I mean, we talked about our ultimate goal of creating white papers on many of these topics, but we didn't talk much about, and we want to make clear tonight that we really feel like the first step will be to gather existing resources. Because we need to look at some of these things. If there's somebody else out there, some other group, you know, national or whatever, that has already gathered really good research and has some materials that we can use, we'll use those. We don't want to create more work for anybody. So we feel like the first step is a sort of a shallower dive to just say, okay, what's out there? What are some models that we could look at if this kind of system or whatever it is exists, and how might we apply that in New Mexico, or how would it be different or the same in New Mexico? So that's probably just going to be a one-page thing. And so when we talk later and we go over the list, just be thinking about that, like what you might be interested in creating that one-page compilation of existing resources on that topic. It doesn't mean it has to be the topic that is near and dear to you. I mean, maybe some of us, there's a lot of topics here, might do one or two of those, and then when we do the deeper dive, you might wind up doing something else. So you're not committing yourself to something for the long term by agreeing to do the initial gathering of existing resources.
And the other reason for doing this is one of the things we wanted to talk about was prioritizing. And we felt like prioritizing without even looking into these areas at all was kind of just going by a word or a phrase instead of, oh my God, there's so much potential in this one area. We really need to focus on that. And it wouldn't have risen to that level. I saw Puck's hand go up. Did you have a comment, Puck? Oh,
yeah, just an organizational thought. So to save you two because I'm just thinking of the fire hose of information that I'm about to email you all, background research, because I've been working on this, researching things for 10 years, is what if we set up a Google Drive that has a document for each of our 18, and then we all independently on our own go in and link resources into that document so that it's already sorted when you two, or Paul and Roxanne, go to look at it, and it saves you a step.
Well, that's something we talked about earlier today. We're gonna look at that. Is everyone comfortable using Google Drive? Or let's say, is anybody not comfortable using Google Drive? Because we use that with more or less success in our other endeavors, and some people don't like it or have a problem with it. The other option that we were gonna look more closely at is using our Nation Builder platform for something really similar to that, where we think we'll have to check in with our Nation Builder expert, Saraswati, but we think we can create a workspace for all of us, and we'd all log in. We'd have our info in there about who we are and how to contact us and which topic we're researching. And then you'd also be able to, we think, but we need to double check, upload what you're working on. So we'll either use Google Docs.
The other option was Dropbox.
Oh,
And so we're going to look into all of those. As we bumped into that, we started realizing it would make sense for everybody to have the access to that. And it could have your bios, it could have contact information and stuff like that. Also, Adam had his hand up.
Hi, thanks. I apologize if you've already had a discussion on this since I wasn't here the first time. But Paul, you mentioned prioritization, and I guess I used to teach classes on strategy, and the first thing that you said to people was to strategize is to make choices about priorities. And my concern looking at this is I'm attracted to this project because you want to take a kind of comprehensive view. But if I look at a document that has 18 different action items, my eyes sort of glaze over. And I feel that, to have more than 2 or 3 things that are really priorities is to be confusing and maybe distracting to your potential audience. Depends on who your audience is. If the audience is all policy wonks like me, then great. Let's go for 18 things and dig deep into them. And I think we can do that. But I just would like to ask whether we might, and maybe that's what you're saying, we need to pick a small number of things and maybe an overarching kind of framework so that if we're going to turn this from something that a small group of policy wonks are interested into the large movement, I think we have to move in that direction. So,
Roxanne?
Well, yeah, this is a potential list. And Paul and I spent some time the other day trying to figure out, okay, we had, I think, 14 things, but with input, now we have 18. And they're all important, and it would be great to do all of them, but we're not going to be able to do that. Maybe over time, if we, spent the next 5 years working on these things. But I think what we're going to try to do tonight is we're going to ask you what you're interested in, and then that's what we're going to start, doing the first dive into. And then we'll just keep this list of other things there off to the side. And if we finish something, then we would maybe, move back to the list and say, okay, let's tackle this now. And that's just in terms of gathering resources and doing research and maybe writing a white paper, not getting it implemented in the state, because of course that can take years. So yeah, I know we agree it's a very long list. We're not going to try to tackle it all, but we wanted to honor everyone's choices and recommendations about what they thought was important.
Okay, it's Charles, and then Scott, and then Teresa, and then Bruce. Can you write that down? Because I won't remember it. And then I'd also say that while we have 18 topics right now, if 18 people each take a different topic and we develop 18 white papers in 6 months or 8 months or what have you, the next step is to kind of piece them out. It's not like we're asking somebody to hold all 18 of them. We would be going to people who would be advancing each one of them independently, and maybe would write something that would say, hey, there's some dots to be connected here.
Yeah, and keep in mind that part of our initial look at these things, we're going to find that several of them, somebody's already doing it. We won't have to actually do the research. We're going to use their research and use their materials.
So it's Charles' turn first, and then Scott, and Teresa, and then Adam has his
Terry,
hand.
I think.
Terry, and then, Bruce.
Yeah, Bruce. Yeah.
Go, Charles.
Well, I guess a couple things I wanted to say. First of all, it was kind of interesting that one of you said that this is a white middle class group. Well, I can already tell by listening to you guys that you guys are a lot more high powered than I ever was. I'm basically working class. And the way I came into computers was through the back door working in the factory. And most of my background, even though I did finally get a college degree, most of my background as far as research has been doing on my own in college libraries and things of that nature. And then when I got retired, I discovered the internet. I found out, gee, I could find a lot more stuff. So that's where I'm coming from. When I hear things like this Google thing, I may need some coaching before I can do it, because I've never done that one before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Go
ahead.
But my background basically tells me that one thing I do know is I do understand how business enterprise works, because I've had enough jobs with it to where I've seen it from all different directions.
Okay.
And I think that that's my background for the co-ops. That's what I offer to the co-op movement. The banking comes out of my banking and finance and economics degree. Okay, so that's not practical, but it's there.
Okay.
Sure.
All
Okay.
right.
Thanks.
I think it was Scott next.
Okay, let me just get back to where I can see my camera. Okay. First thing, I just wanted to mention that the gentleman who just spoke as I think he described himself as a working class person as opposed to all of the gourmet chefs at the meeting. He may very well be our most important asset in understanding the challenges that we need to overcome. So I just want to say that I think the opportunities for that gentleman to participate in a group like this are enormous. Now, the other comment I wanted to make was that the 18 topics, it is a lot, and there is some organization that's possible. A lot of these overlap. They're not all parallel to one another. Some of them are cross-cutting, and they can be reduced to I think a simpler set of of categories that may be more, that may actually strengthen it, because the undersell is probably the most effective sell. The other comment I wanted to make was that if you had 18 people writing these things independently, we'd end up with a completely incoherent scenario, which would look exactly like how Democrats so often look. So that I would recommend that once there's some higher level of organization introduced to these concepts, that it really might be a working group opportunity to ensure that there's internal consistency and an absence of dichotomy among the components of this plan. And secondly, of course, as soon as someone opens up their mouth to make a suggestion, as we all know, no good deed goes unpunished. So let me just put it right out there that I offer my services as a scientist and an author to help craft any materials that you would like me to work on. That's just a simple, open-ended offer.
That's great. Thanks. I'll just to reply quickly. We will probably create a template and talk to people in more detail about what the end product is going to look like, and really go over what we're all going to be.
Well, that sounds like a great idea. That sounds a lot like a survey. And so we could begin perhaps by, in a process like that, understanding where the common perspectives are, so that we can sort of begin weaving those together.
Okay.
No, Terry
Terry.
said she doesn't. She just
Oh.
was using thumbs up, so she
Okay.
sent us a note and said she doesn't need to
Okay.
talk right now yet.
Bruce had his hand up, though.
Yeah, Bruce.
So one subject that I mentioned before that's not on the list is transportation. And I consider putting transportation on there too, although I hate to add, 18 is a lot. But I think transportation is important, particularly in a state like New Mexico, which is so large and spread out.
Right.
So I think that's something that we might look at as well. And I want to reiterate or second what Scott was saying. I think, maybe we could have some small subgroup task force of 3 or 4 people to look at all these topics and see how they could be combined. So maybe we could come up with 6 or 8 rather than 18.
Well, just to remind people that we originally had it that way. And it was like, there were like 6 or 8, and they were like, building sustainable communities.
Democratizing the economy.
Democratizing the economy. And it wound up being like, well, any one group would be a massive task. And so we could bat this around for the entire meeting. And what I would suggest is that we look at these things as they are, as discrete things, gather what we find, and then what Bruce is suggesting is or something like that is a good idea. We could figure out where the dots connect and overlap and create, public ownership, and then it's water, energy, transportation, whatever.
Yeah.
And that would be a better conceptual framework for the whole thing.
But we can just add transportation now to the draft list. Yeah,
Okay.
I think we just forgot. We saw the note, but we forgot.
Yeah, no, that's
okay. I think Rich had his hand up. Did you have a comment?
I totally agree with what Paul just said. Nothing further.
Okay. All right. So we should move ahead with our agenda.
Well, in some ways, we did the last thing on the agenda, which was discuss the best platform for putting it on.
For sharing
We'll figure that
information.
out. And we've been doing.
Rick's got his hand up.
We've been doing the discussion of the categories for the last 10 minutes.
Okay, Rick.
Who was Rick?
Yeah, just very briefly, in addition to transportation, I didn't really see a category that in which shelter or housing might fit neatly. So I submit that might be something we consider as well, especially here in Santa Fe.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. It's getting longer.
Gentrification.
And then, this is Laura.
It's housing in general.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I might jump in, I was just talking to Rick just now. I was wondering, is in the interest of not reinventing the wheel for New Mexico in these ways, I was wondering if a group like this could find some national organization with this kind of platform that already exists, right? That we could basically, I don't know, co-opt some of their approach, or if we could agree on such a thing, such an organization. I don't know if that's.
Well, if you look at the website, we have a page for for this work, TSG, and there's a list of groups like that. Democracy Collaborative, Next System Project, Resilience, Next Cities. And so we're going to draw from them. And like Roxanne says, we may discover that one of them has 4 or 5 white papers on 4 or 5 of our topics. And we go, okay, great.
And then we'll just use that. Yeah.
Right. Robert, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I'll just throw this out. I sent a link to you and Roxanne a day or two ago. Is anybody in the group familiar with this? And I just discovered them and I haven't really done a deep dive. 100% Community Initiative. It's I think the original thing was, I'm blanking on the thing. But in any case, it's a group that's very localized. They're into very specific local initiatives. It's not quite the same thing as what I think we're doing, but there is some overlap. I'm just curious, is anybody familiar? I think it's a relatively new group. I think it's 2020.
Laura?
I've heard of them. I know I used to work for New Mexico Department of Health, and I know Dominic Capello, I believe, is an epidemiologist there after my time there, and Jen Manzanares, who I have interaction with across a couple of community organizations I participate in. It was also involved with them for at least Santa Fe County. I'm not familiar with all that they're doing in the various counties that they're involved in, the ANA H8.
Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing a little discussion in the chat about, let's figure out what the one thing that we can do. So I'm not sure.
I don't think that's what we were trying to do.
Yeah, I don't know that we can do that. I don't know if we can get it down to one thing. I just think, and maybe eventually we'll say, okay, this is the one thing we're going to focus on for the next 3 months. But I think at least initially we need to do some exploration around some of these things and do the first step that we were talking about earlier. And then maybe decide, okay, what are the top 2 priorities, that we could really feasibly make happen in New Mexico?
Yeah, and the other thing is my head starts to explode if I thought about trying to coordinate 18 people doing research in 2 topics, for example. And so we'd have 9 people on each and trying to sort it out so that they weren't duplicating or contradicting each other. It just makes my head explode.
Well, and we want people to use their expertise, and we want people to be researching something that they are really interested in and care about. And, maybe some of those initial things we won't use right away, but none of it is going to be wasted, and everything that we research, we can publish on the website, as a resource, even 1-page things on any topic. So it's all going to be worthwhile.
Okay, Terry. I don't know how to acknowledge that I see the hand raised.
Yeah, that's okay. I just wanted to say real quick that my sort of approach to things, because I don't agree with uniformity, and I'm sort of sorry that we can impose uniformity afterwards, but when I'm going to research, I'm going to be completely friggin' open, because I'm going to look at stuff that says no as well as stuff that says yes. I'm not going to go into it looking for something that supports what I would like to see. I want to see everything. So I'm just saying that's how I'm going to approach it, because when you go in with a preconceived notion, you're going to come up with, you're not going to see the dimensions of everything. So
you're going to reinforce that preconceived notion. Yeah. And I want to acknowledge, Terry, that you had put something in chat earlier that you had mentioned last time too, which is to create some research resources for the group too, like tools to use and websites and things. And we have that a little bit in that topics menu that that Paul put together, but I think we need more than that. You know, some, I can't remember exactly how you put it, but, you know, some resources for research that we can all look to, especially, I mean, we all have our favorite things that we do. I mean, and you can use Google, but Google is very broad. You know, it'd be nice if we have some more specific suggestions about where to go.
And we have a research guide that 2 of our researchers developed that's like 40 pages. And it includes a litany of resources and ways to get things outside of Google, things to be, I mean, they were both librarian researchers with doctorates, you know, and they put this together. It was an overkill, but you scan it and it might be a benefit to you, and it'll come to you, Terry. Robert had his hand up.
Yeah, I'll just come back to something I mentioned in my introduction. I'm seeing something maybe divided into stuff that's accomplished at the governmental level, meaning New Mexico or county or city, and stuff that are initiatives that are original, or if not original, they have a kind of organic origin from the group. The stuff in the governmental is the classic retake stuff that's been done by lobbying and of course is very successful, throwing out of the dinos, or at least 4 of the dinos. That stuff that, you know, you can focus on legislative action, governmental action at whatever level. And the other stuff is outside of that domain. I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there. What do other people think? Or is that a legitimate topic that
I'm not sure we want to try to come up with the categories now, because it really, I think that's what you're saying, how to group things. And I think maybe we need to get a little further. And I just think it would be very time consuming to do that in this meeting. So, but we welcome all suggestions. So if you think of anything, send us a note, you know, whether it's tonight or tomorrow, just let us know.
And I'm not sure if I fully understood what Robert was saying, but if it's something that we're already, like Health Security Act or public banking, where it's already here, people are debating it, that's not going to be our priority. Our priority, we're going to advocate like hell for it, but they've got all the materials, they've got all the examples, they've done this work. It's the areas where it's not formulated, or we don't have a good translation of it over to a New Mexico context.
Good.
I hope that helps.
Okay,
so the next thing on the agenda was to kind of try and go through and just have people say, I'll take this on. And by this, we mean maybe spend 4 or 5 hours, and I don't even know if it'd take that long, doing your searches, going and finding within that category 4, 5, 8 articles, a model, things that you think would be very, very useful for all of us to consider and could be the starting point for research in that area. And then also just a sentence or 2 about each one of them, so we know what is out there. And then if there's any 1 or 2 sites in particular that are just like knock it out of the park, making note of that, where, you know, we could really shortcut this whole thing by just taking this document and working with it.
Right, and I mean, this is in the document that we sent you today. The other small piece, well, could be a big piece, is if you discover anything in your initial look on the topic that helps you, gives you an idea about how this might happen in our state, or how it could be, you know, replicated in New Mexico, then say something about that too.
Yeah, and keep in mind, this group, we're not going to be able, we've got 20 people in the group if you count Roxanne and I, and 18 of us are on right now, actually 19 because Michael keeps coming and going. It's going to be impossible to make it work for everybody right off the bat. We're going to try and do the best we can, and I think that the next step of just getting some summaries together so that everybody can kind of take a look and go like, oh my God, this is pretty amazing research and resources out there. And then we'll go from there. And it might be the grouping thing that people want to do, the narrowing thing, but let's see what's out there first and what's exciting.
So does everybody feel okay about going through the list and just, if you're interested, raise your hand. I mean, I guess if we have like 5 people interested in one thing, we might ask some of you to take on something else. And just keep in mind, this does not mean this would be the longer term project. This is just the smaller digging on the surface.
And I know that someone, and I can't remember who it was, might have been Adam, wrote to me and said they were very interested in progressive tax reform and that we don't want to just limit ourselves to what New Mexico Voices is doing. But I would say that we're very interested in opening our eyes to much more than what, because that's a good example, because New Mexico Voices, their lens is on what has been historically possible in the legislature. They're not talking about returning to FDR tax rates. And maybe that's what we want to look at, you know?
Yeah.
And so with that in mind, if you raise your hand, the first hand I see, you get to say what Robert Barodi, what would you like to take a look at?
What's your time frame?
What's that?
Well, it's about 2 weeks. We had proposed that our next meeting would be on, I'm sorry. So the 2nd and 4th Tuesday of the month was what I was proposing. We made this Tuesday work. And so, and our Zoominars are on Tuesdays. So I figured if we just made it so that Tuesday was the day that Retake did Zooms, alternate weeks with you, and then alternate weeks with Zoominars. But that doesn't mean you have to get this work done in 2 weeks. If you can, it's great. If you can't, enough people can, and then the next time we have that to discuss.
Well, and if you're coming across challenges when you get started, check in with us, and maybe some of those things can be discussed at the next meeting too. Yeah, so don't feel like you have to have a finished 1-page summary of all the existing research that you can find in 2 weeks.
So Adam and then Puck, and I would just say also, and then Karen. Adam, you're first.
Oh, boy. Well, I'd be very interested in election reform. So
You're going to have to fight Bruce for that one.
Yeah, is there another area that you're interested in? Because Bruce is on it.
And I could look also at public safety.
Okay. Okay.
Are you writing this down?
I am now. Adam, public safety. Puck, you're next. And then
Actually,
Karen.
sorry, the English teacher in me is coming out. What do you all think about doing this in the reverse order and going down the list? Number 1, who's interested? Number 2, who's interested? And I think you'll just see hands pop up, and then we'll quickly have an assessment of.
Great idea.
That's what I thought we were
It'll
going
be
to do.
much quicker than doing it. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Puck. And embarrassingly, I'm a former English teacher and had to have it suggested by another English.
Don't be embarrassed.
And I would say, I think we can skip
Public banking and health security.
because they're already doing all the work. We'll advocate for them and give them our support, but we don't need to do more research.
Who's doing public?
Progressive tax
Yay, we're cutting
reform.
the list down.
Progressive tax reform, if you're interested in that. All right, Rich. Energy, the way it's written there. Scott.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's my field.
utilities. And utilities and energy are kind of interwoven in some ways. Not seeing any takers for utilities. So
And I think this category originally came up in the context of municipalization. So if anybody, I don't mean to add a category, but what's that?
Could I make a comment?
yes.
Is it okay for me to? Well, as you mentioned, that there is a relationship between those two, and in fact, separating them is sort of tantamount to assuming that they have to remain as separate structures. So I
would you be interested
happy
in
to
taking both?
Yeah, I would, and trying to merge them into a singular perspective.
Okay.
Energy and utilities. Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm not making any promises, but I'd like to try.
Well,
Scott guarantees he'll have that figured out in 2 weeks. All right.
prisons, are we talking about,
I'll have to improve my effective communication skills.
Prisons.
prisons or criminal justice reform?
Criminal justice reform, prisons.
Oh,
And
Laura's
that's,
interested
Laura,
in that.
that you want to do?
Sure.
Great.
Laura. Okay, now we're going over.
Can we have more than one person? Like, why couldn't Terry help?
Well, let's go through and
Yeah.
see what we get, and
Right.
then people can join in with others, yes. Local food production and distribution.
Wait, we didn't talk.
Yes, that's me.
Oh, it says Adam.
wait,
I
who's that?
love to eat. Gardening's a hobby. I want to get into that
Wait.
and figure
Oh,
out.
who is that? Is that
It's
Michael?
disgusting. Pardon?
Who is that?
Robert.
Robert. Rudy?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Sorry,
Yeah, I find
there's
it-
so many people on the screen. I couldn't tell who was talking.
Yeah, raise your
Yeah,
hand that we can see you.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
But all right, we got Robert on local food, democratizing the
Wait a
work.
minute, did we skip public safety?
No, Adam had already said he wanted to do public safety.
Oh, okay, sorry about that.
Democratizing the workplace. Charles.
That could be whatever, worker co-ops, whatever.
Community land trusts. This is one of those things that's a little more narrow than the others. Rick.
Great.
This is
I know nothing about it, but I've always wanted to learn something about it. So
okay, it's
Perfect.
this is working much better than I thought it would be. Local energy systems. That's
that's
Karen.
Okay.
And you may also want to be talking
To
with
Scott.
because that sort of fits in with local renewable energy and energy.
Maybe you guys can communicate and figure out, so you're not, recreating or duplicating the work.
Infrastructure development in rural and indigenous communities. Okay.
All right, well, let's
We'll
skip
move
that
on.
one for now.
All right, now here's one that's going to be duplicated because someone came up with the idea of imagining clean environment, or they didn't say clean,
Just somebody
imagining
said environment.
environment, and it was water and
Well, no.
toxics and things like that.
Yeah, it had to do with pollution in our water, air, food system, nuclear issues.
Yeah,
So I can't remember who brought that up by email today.
I did.
but that means we've got water separated. And so it may be that we wind up grouping those together.
Did you,
Greg,
or wait, Adam's got
Adam,
that.
do you have your hand up or is it just up there as an artifact?
No. Do I have it up? Sorry, that's a mistake.
That's right, I just clicked it.
Okay.
Okay.
No.
Greg, you want to do water?
Yes, please.
Okay, great.
And then election reform, I'm guessing, Bruce, you better do it now.
I'm going to expand that into campaign finance reform and related topics.
Yeah,
Yeah, and also on that one, we really want to look at, one of the things I have a bug up my rear about is that we spend our whole lives in election mode. And it's just crazy. And, other countries do elections in 4 and at much less expense and without a lot of misinformation. And so beyond, voter registration and ranked choice voting and open primaries and things like that, I think we want to really open that up.
Yeah, definitely.
okay.
And Adam, if you want to work on this with me, that'd be great too.
Okay.
Okay, I'd be happy to. Yeah, if you want to send me your thoughts and we can go
Yeah,
back
we'll
and forth.
communicate offline.
Okay. Reimagining education. Wendy. I'm so glad someone suggested that.
Yeah.
Anti-racism.
That's the one I'd like to work on also, education.
Oh, okay.
Wendy and Lonnie.
Okay.
Anti-racism. Okay. Nobody raising their hand on that one?
Well, I'm certainly no expert on the subject, but I worked in multiple racial settings in 49 years of work. And I think I understand some of the problems with the institutionalized arguments and things of that nature. So maybe I could help with some of that, and also with the infrastructure in the rural and the tribal areas. The workers' co-op would go well with that if you look at the history of Mondragon.
Right. Well, we don't want you to take on too much right off the bat. So let's think about that. And how many, because you took democratizing the workplace, right?
Right.
But yeah, there's going to be some crossover with these things. That's just going to happen, and we can sort through that later. What about clean environment? Imagining clean environment. Carl.
That's Carl.
Okay.
I'm in shock. Reimagining the corporate sector. Huck.
Ooh.
I would like that.
I'd help with that too.
No, Rich, you've already got something. Back off.
Oh, you want to help with that? Go
No,
ahead.
let's do both of these together, okay? We get to work together again.
Oh, you want to work on
wait,
reimagining corporate? So did Puck.
And taxes also.
Okay, and Puck. Puck raised her hand.
Yeah, Terry.
The three of us on corporate stuff. It's a good chunk. Yeah.
Is there anybody that doesn't have something? I think everybody's picked.
No, I
Joyce.
lost my video. Sorry, folks. I lost my.
So Joyce, the two things.
I wasn't able to raise my hand, obviously.
Oh, sorry. Are you interested in housing? Because that's something that got added that no one has.
Yes, I'll take it.
I thought you might be. Okay, great.
Who's doing it?
And
Joyce
transportation.
Bogosian.
Also. What about transportation?
Well,
That was the other one that was.
that's the other one that has not been chosen. Knowing Michael, I think we lost Michael again, Sperberg and Queen. I'm not sure. I don't see him on here. I'm not sure transportation is his thing either. But, we don't. I
can't believe we got all of this.
Right. I didn't expect us to get somebody on every single one of these things. So I think we're doing damn good.
Who took housing? Who's
What's that?
doing housing?
Joyce.
Yeah, Joyce, I can be a resource for that. I'm a longtime housing attorney, so.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, Rich, we'll work together.
Well, at least I'll be a resource, but maybe we can work together too. Okay?
Yeah.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
because he's got his own topic
Right.
too, progressive tax reform.
Okay.
Let's just say something about working in a context of Zoom and almost 20 people, and if more people join, I think we have to expect that the meetings themselves are not going to be the richest part of the thing. I mean, we'll get to know each other and stuff, but it's going to be a lot of logistics and a lot of people getting not nearly as much time to be able to describe their thoughts. And after we get the framework all done, Roxanne and I won't have to talk nearly as much. We're just kind of reacting to things that people suggest.
Should we go through this to make sure we got everything right? Can I just do it really quickly and just holler if I say something wrong? You don't have to confirm unless it's wrong. Okay. We're skipping public bank. Progressive tax reform, that's writ. We're skipping health security. Energy and utilities, 4 and 5, that's Scott. Prison or criminal justice reform, that's Laura. Public safety is Adam. And Adam said he would also work on election reform with Bruce. Local food production, Robert.
And Greg.
What's that?
And Greg, I think, is interested as well.
Oh, but he picked water. Well, maybe, okay, Robert and Greg.
We'll communicate
You can
between us.
communicate, yeah. Okay, democratizing the workplace is Charles. Community land trust, Rick. Local renewable energy systems, Karen. And she's gonna consult with Scott, who's doing energy and utilities. And then water is Greg, who will also connect with Robert on local food production, like we said. Election reform, that's Bruce. Also consulting with Adam, as I mentioned. Reimagining Education is Wendy and Lonnie, I think. Is that right? Imagining Clean Environment, that's Carl. Reimagining the Corporate Sector, that's Terry and Puck.
And Rich.
And Rich.
Oh, and Rich was the.
And also Terry's on tax reform, on progressive taxation with me.
Yeah, and then Housing is Joyce, and Rich offered to be a resource with that. So the only two things we really didn't, transportation, which was just added tonight, and then anti-racism. And I don't know, I can probably do a little research.
Yeah, you're reading the
I'm reading
anti-racist
a book on, it's a really great book, Ibram, I'm gonna forget his last name, but he won a Pulitzer Prize for his last.
Kendi.
What is it?
Kendi, right? Ibrahim Kendi.
Yes, exactly. And it's what he says, it's not enough to say I'm not a racist. You have to be an anti-racist. That's his big point. And I'm only about 40 pages in, but you know, that's a starting point for me. So I can do a little research. You know, we're just talking about a one-page compilation of existing resources with maybe a couple models to look at and a couple suggestions about how we can do this in our state.
So this wasn't on the agenda, but I think if you look at the second page of the document that we sent out this morning or this afternoon, there's a part where it says, this is what the 4 to 5 page brief will look like.
But we're not talking about that.
I understand that.
Okay.
But when you're going out and looking, if you see something and they do a like phenomenal needs statement, you know, with all kinds of documents and stuff, make sure that that's part of your bulleted list. You'd say that, you know, this article really lays out the needs statement perfectly in a page or something like that. And the same goes for any key principles, places where things like this are being done, and just how you see it as fitting in with New Mexico. Because those are going to be kind of the layout so far anyway of what we're trying to do. And I see Puck has raised her hand.
So I don't know how to say this without sounding very odd, but a number of you very rightly raised the point of, aren't we being kind of white intellectuals and favoring the written word, and kind of, in other words, you can't solve a problem using the same thinking that created it. So as we go out, I'm encouraging myself, I'm saying this out loud to myself, but I'm trying to keep an open mind for other ways of conveying this information also. Like, is there an artist that has a painting that kind of can convey this? Is there a song I could play for you all that would start to move us into that kind of creative fertile edge of like a reimagining a new way of thinking? So I'm saying to myself that I'm giving myself permission to bring you all like a movement sculpture or something as part of this 4 to 5 page document to like just broaden the ways that we think.
I think that's great. And I think a couple things to keep in mind. At first, to respond what you were saying, Puck, is that what we're going to do with this stuff, we're going to educate people, but we want to inspire people too. We want to motivate people. So some people might be inspired by facts. Some people are inspired by art and other ways of looking at issues. So I think that's a great suggestion. And also just when we're doing these initial dives, yeah, like Paul was saying, keep in mind that, I mean, I'm guessing maybe people can carry on with the same thing they started, but just think to yourself, maybe I'm going to choose something else, or this isn't even going to be, we're going to do this later, or the thing that I'm doing, is going to be one of the priorities. So when you're creating those materials and describing them very briefly, just keep in mind someone else might be using this thing that you create. So just be as clear as you can. And like Paul said, if something's really excellent, make a note of it and say why.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bruce has his hand up, and then Greg.
I want to encourage everybody when they're making their list of resources and so forth to try to include people of color, minority resources as well, because we are an all-white group here, and so it doesn't feel very inclusive, and so I think we need to look at how we can get more people or more resources involved that are different perspective than
Yeah.
white people's perspective.
Okay, Greg? And then Roxanne.
You're muted, Greg.
When you have the chat window open, pressing the space bar doesn't work.
Oh.
So what Bruce just said, and also what Puck said before, I'm thinking rather than strictly do online or library research, also talk to people. Like if I'm going to be looking at food production, you know, and I know this guy down the county road has been an organic farmer for 30 years, I should go talk to him. You know, I mean, get into the anthropological mode maybe and find informants. That is a little harder to do, especially with the pandemic on. But you know, phone calls are safe. So I just want to throw that out.
Yeah, it makes the research more interesting too, I think.
In my head, I sort of thought Puck's and your suggestion were like step 2 once we had a compilation of research, but that doesn't mean it can't be part of your initial foray. And I definitely second Bruce's comment. If it hadn't been made, I was going to make that suggestion.
So with that in mind, what Bruce just said and then what Terry has said earlier, do we want to send in, or each of you can send to us some of your favorite go-to sources or some of these other ideas? Like, I mean, it could be anything from something you find on Google or an organization that you go to, or make suggestions, because then we can compile these like sort of research tips and resources into one place. And so if you kind of get stuck, or if you just want to look at them before you get started, maybe you'll get ideas that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So please send us any ideas that you have about that, and we'll compile them into one place.
Karen?
That's a great idea. And is there a way we can get access to that 40-page research guide?
Yes. I'll send a link out to it.
Good. Thank you.
Yes, Robert.
Yeah, I noticed that I think on one of your original emails, you referenced Resilience. Is it resilience.com or resilience.org?
Yeah, .org.
Yeah, and that's a pretty good source. I mean, you know, they're all over the place, but they have some good ideas and good links.
I would definitely encourage you to go to the webpage under resources in our homepage. It has the Transformation Study Group. I don't remember what else it says, but it's the only thing there.
Under
and
resources.
It's under resources. There's like Next City, Resilience, Democracy Collaborative,
Next Systems.
Next System Project, a litany of resources that kind of span.
Right.
And like Robert said, Resilience and Next City in particular, they just have all these different interesting models that they've studied all over the world that are in place and that are consistent with what we're talking about.
Where is that list, Paul?
It's under, if you go to the
We'll send you a link.
retakeourdemocracy.org.
Oh, retake.
Yeah,
to
well,
everybody.
let's do a follow-up email tomorrow to everybody.
Okay.
We'll put down the names and what topics you chose, and we'll link you to the 40-page thing and the thing that Paul's just talking about on the website, and then we'll ask you to write back to us with your research suggestions and sources.
Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody else have anything else to see? Yes, Lonnie has something.
Yeah, just two things real quick. I looked on the website and I have missed it, but has there been a working definition put forward for what this group is thinking of as far as transformation? Because there is so much literature out there on transformative leadership and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Everybody's talking about it, but that I think might be an important issue, is to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of, are we sharing a frame of reference for what we're talking about with transformation? That's related to my second point. I think the latest out of the climate change and sustainability thinking a lot of this is referenced through the UN, is that there's about 10 years left to come up with real solutions for where we are at this point for climate change. And I mean, it seems clear to me that the biggest challenge for New Mexico, and I don't know if this rises to the status of the elephant in the room or not, but is the question of, can New Mexico break its dependence on the oil and gas industry? Because if it can't, then 10 years are going to go by like that, and it'll be potentially too late.
Well, that's
So
where we're
if-
looking at energy, and in some fashion, I read an article just recently about how the only way we're going to do it is if we nationalize the gas and oil industry and cut our losses, because it's never going to get us where we need to go.
Yeah.
And it even had a budget of $1.2 trillion is the cost.
Energy and local renewable energy systems. Yeah, we didn't break out like a just transition for New Mexico because it's just such a massive category and it has connections to a lot of these other categories. So that's why we didn't actually make that as a topic. But, you know, we could find that several of these things will come together at some point and form the bigger picture of what could be a just transition in the state.
Puck.
Lonnie, thank you for raising that. And I wonder if climate change, like anti-racism, is going to be a golden thread through every one of our topics. And maybe we should think about that. You know, what does climate change do for my topic, number 9 or number 12? And then I think in some ways COVID has broken our addiction on the oil and gas market. And now the big question in front of us is, well, what do we do now? And I think that's what this group can start to offer, is ideas to fill that void so that we don't just go back or try to go back to an oil dependence, but have some concrete ideas to move towards.
I like the way you think, Puck.
Robert?
Maybe another huge, broad idea, and I don't know how many people would agree with this, is in some ways it's called degrowth or sustainability. We cannot go on as we have been for the last 30, 40 years. I think it's fairly obvious, especially with the COVID crisis. And we just have to figure out to do better with what we have, and maybe even less. Better with less, for me, has been kind of a guiding principle in the last few years.
Yeah, and that was actually, when you go to the page that has all the resources in it and links that we had put together, you'll see that was a topic. It was basically sustainable economic development or sustainable local economic development. But, you know, I've written a lot about how we can't continue to grow. We have to have a degrowth or a non-growth economy. You can't continue to consume energy and resources when there are a limited number of them. And then that still has to be done equitably, because it's real easy for people who have a lot of resources to say, well, it's time to stop now. We've got ours.
Yeah, yeah. So
I just want to mention, please don't worry too much about a growing economy at this point.
Yeah, COVID took care of that for us.
Not this year.
So we only have about 5 minutes left. So I just want to say, if all of you would write your paragraph about yourself, name, contact info, maybe if you're comfortable, maybe include a phone number too. And then one paragraph about who you are, where you live, and maybe a little bit about your background. You don't need to send us your CV. But and is everybody okay, or is anybody not okay with sharing all of that with the rest of the group?
If you're not, let us know.
Yeah, it looks like nobody's raising their hand, everybody's nodding. So I think we're good, because we had a little on the side there, the chat, you know, let's share contact information. I'm just double checking to make sure that's okay with everybody. And and it looks like it is. So that's the first thing. And then we'll get that back out to you. We're going to, in the meantime, try to look at Nation Builder as a possibility for a group workspace. And if not, then maybe we'll use Dropbox or Google Drive. We don't know yet. And whatever we use, we'll send it back out to you by email, but we'll also put that, and we'll make it password protected, all the contact info up in that space so you can access it if you happen to get it by email and lose it. What
and
else?
then the other thing is, at least tentatively, I had put out the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays of the month, which would mean our next meeting would be July 14th, and then the one after that would be July 28th. So if people have a big issue with that, please let me know. But if it's just like, I won't be able to do the 14th, it's my birthday, maybe you just miss one of the meetings and, you know, accommodate every possible alternative. But if that works for you, you don't have to say anything. But if it doesn't, let us know.
And it's
At the same time?
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, is 5:30 okay? Then we can get done by 7 and there's time to have dinner or, you know, watch your favorite show or whatever.
July 14th at 6, there's a Zoominar on the New Mexico Green Amendment.
On what?
On New Mexico what?
Green Amendment, which goes from 6 to 7.
Huh. Well,
There's no way we'll avoid a conflict.
I know there's always going to be something. So I don't know. I'm hesitant to say, let's pick another day.
Yeah.
No, but Bastille Day is a particularly good day for a meeting. That's Bastille Day.
Oh, is it? Oh, the 14th of July. Yeah. I don't know. Were a lot of people planning on watching that? If so, we could talk about changing it, but.
Is it recorded? Can it be recorded?
Usually they are.
Usually they are, so maybe, yeah.
And we're recording. So I think that, you know, we do this all the time. And that's why we went to Zoominars on alternate Tuesdays. And like, if you can't make it, that's sad. Yeah. But because otherwise we'd just move it to something and somebody else would say that's blah, blah, blah.
Something else is happening. Yeah. And so, by the way, I think maybe you all know this, but a week from tonight at 6:30 we're doing a Zoominar on the Health Security Act with all the experts from Health Security for New Mexicans. So you can find that info on the website. Under events and
actions and events,
yeah.
Zoominar series. And this will be one of the first times Puck wasn't the first person to register.
Well, Robert, you're gonna have to skip your dinner with the King of Spain.
All right. Is there anything else non-silly that needs to be said? Puck, you were going to say something?
So, because I'm such a little task-minded person, what do I need to have done by next Tuesday? This whole paper done? And emailed to you ahead of time, or we're presenting, or what do I need to do?
The first thing is your little bio, okay? Do that first, send those to us. We'll send a note tomorrow morning and we'll go over what we talked about today in brief, and we'll remind you to send the bio. And then 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks, you know, you have to do the one page, and maybe we should reiterate what's going to be on that one page.
Well, and the other thing is if 18 people do their one pagers, we're not going to be able to talk. Think about how hard it was to cover everything today. If we had 18 one pagers with multiple resources on each, we'd be all night. So don't feel like you have to have it done. If we have 3 done, we'd have plenty to talk about. But and we're going to have to figure out how to manage that if there are 18. So don't feel like you have to, but what it should include is a half a dozen resources that you kind of looked at. You didn't have to read every word, but you could just tell by scanning it, oh my God, this has everything we want. And then you put the link in a few sentences or a sentence. And we'll send out a very clear thing tomorrow with what that could look like.
And also, bio first. Second, before you get into your research topic, send us your favorite sources for research and whatever suggestions, like whether other types of things like Greg said, interviewing people, Buck said art or music. So send us those and we'll compile all that so that you have that as a resource when you start doing your research. But we'll send out summarizing all this tomorrow morning because we don't want to do it tonight.
Yeah. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much, everybody. We're going to close the meeting.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We're going to do some fun stuff.
Okay.
Blessings to you, Roxanne.
Oh,
right.
thank you.
Sorry for your loss, Roxanne.
Yeah.
Really sorry.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. It helps. Mhm.
Yay.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Paula, Roxanne.
Bye.
I